Yes, Adam, once again, welcome to you from Speaker's Impact. We are in this module going to speak a bit about how to speak like a star.
Wonderful.
And this is something that I, as a mentor, and myself as a founder, I see the same like pitch module practice training courses over and over again, and it's kind of the same content of that it consists of. But I am looking for some new advice on how to speak like a star, and how to learn to do something different, how to create movement and ambassadors. Maybe we can say that we are post-attending the minor pitch sessions locally based, but now we are maybe going beyond borders as a founder and pitching at maybe conferences and bigger events and defining and becoming a public speaker as a person.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you asked me for this content, because I think it's something that is missed out a lot. Because so many times when people are asked to present at a conference, you go onto Google and how to present, and it's literally the same, and everyone's, I'll start with an introduction, then I'll show the team, then the growth potential, then the opportunity, then the blah, blah, blah. And probably what happens is your presentation looks exactly the same as everybody else's. But of course, we all know in business, the number one thing is to be different. It's really hard to be different if you're asked to be the same as everybody else. And I will be honest, I know exactly why this happens, and I can show you exactly what you should do or how you should think to really take your speaking to the next level. So what usually happens is most people, they will be invited to speak somewhere, and the organizer will say, you've got to do a pitch, or you've got to do a presentation, or you've got to do a whatever, and you've got a certain number of minutes to do it in. And basically, you as a human being, because you're a little bit terrified of speaking, think, oh my God, all I've got to do is survive the next 8 minutes. They've given me 8 minutes, I've just got to survive it. And you write down some notes, you make some nice slides, that's about 8 minutes long. And when you get to 7 minutes and 59 seconds, you think, thank goodness that's over. And then you think that that's it. You think that that's game over. And you think, oh, they asked me to do a pitch, I did a pitch, my job is done. But unfortunately, that's not how the best storytellers work. And when you do something like that, all you're doing is the exact same as everybody else. Where stories really strike people is not in the story that you tell about yourself, but the story that other people tell about you. Because as humans, we are massive storytellers. And a sad thing to think about is even when we die, nobody ever talks about our profit and loss at our funeral. Nobody ever opens up a spreadsheet to summarize us in the funeral. What do? They stand around and they tell stories. Do you remember the time when this person did that thing? And that's how we live on in people's memories, through stories, the stories that we tell about each other. So when you're on stage, your mission is not to survive for the next 8 minutes. Your mission is to give the audience a new story, so that when they go home and they say, they're sat around at the family dinner table and their kid says, Daddy, what did you see at the conference? Well, isn't it better if instead of Daddy saying, oh, just some boring presentations, if they say, well, I saw this one presentation and oh my goodness, you wouldn't believe it. And they start to tell your story on your behalf, and they become these sort of viral ambassadors.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
You can say whatever you want about yourself, but what other people say about you is infinitely more powerful, because they will tell their friends and they will tell the right people your story.
Exactly.
So the trick is to make sure that you know what other people are saying about you and use those words in your presentation. So a great thing to do, and this is a really funny thing, I call it the grandma test. And what you can do is when you make a pitch, you can make your pitch, but you don't want to give it to investors. You don't want to give it to conference organizers. You want to give it to your grandma. And you call up your grandmother and you say, Granny, I'm going to give you this pitch. Da, 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 da. And poor old granny, she doesn't know what the hell you're talking about. But she'll listen. She'll be like, that's nice, dear. And if you haven't got a granny, find somebody else's granny, call them up. They love to hear from you. Yeah. And then what you do is about a week later, call Granny up again and say, Granny, what was it we were talking about last time?
Yeah.
And listen exactly to what she remembers. Because you might have been speaking to Granny for 10 minutes, but she'll only remember the 2 minutes that were the most important. And what's important to Granny might not be what's important to you. She certainly didn't remember those facts and figures, but you can guarantee that your Granny has been telling the next door neighbor and the woman down the road and the person at the post office, oh, my grandson has been doing all this lovely stuff. And she'll be spreading that story for you. You know it. And then you can find out which bits of your story are spreadable and putting the most emphasis on those when you're presenting. And the nice thing about that is when you start to understand what people say about you, other people will tell your story for you. And then you really start to spread virally. Because think about how many things that you've done, purchases that you've made, events that you've been to, not because you heard about it directly, but because your friend said, oh, I heard about this thing, and they tell it to you in a way that sells it to you. So you can use, instead of trying to sell to everybody in the conference floor, you can convert everybody in the conference floor to be your own sales staff. And the nice thing about that is, even if you lose the pitch, even if you lose the presentation, even if you come second or third or bottom, even if you break all the rules, it doesn't matter, because now you've got an army of 100 people, 1,000 people who will spread for you. And then you're really. And
that is really also why we pitch, right? I always have considered like the price of the competition, and so like a secondary thing. It's like you have the opportunity of creating so many ambassadors because you have their attention. And their full attention for X couple of minutes, and having that little sales army going out there and sharing the information that they think is important to a person that they think it's relevant for. That is so valuable. It's so much more valuable than winning the pricing.
Exactly. And it's easy to do because we're used to doing things like market research. So if you're a founder and you've got some customers, ask all the customers, what 3 words would you use to describe my company? And use those 3 words. Why would you use your own words when you can use your customers' words? Why would you write the speech when your customers can? Because your customers are going to be telling other customers about it. And it's a really smart way to do it. Go through whatever people have said about you on your LinkedIn, and that's your introduction. Isn't it better to say, instead of saying, hello, I've been doing this for 5 years now and blah, 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 than to say, oh, my old primary school teacher said I was once the best forward roller in the whole of the PE section, PE class. Then it becomes instantly more memorable, it becomes more personal, it becomes more fun, and you'll be remembered a lot more when you speak through the words of others and you tell those stories like that.
So speak through the words of us others, and take your crowd and your ambassadors' words in and use them.
And even if the words are wrong, you can't control it. A great example being right here in Odense is The Little Mermaid is perhaps Andersen's most famous story, but it's made even more famous by Disney animating it. And of course, when Disney animates it, they change the story, they change the characters. It's almost unrecognizable from Andersen's original story. But there are millions of people around the world who know the story because they know Disney. Maybe they don't know Andersen, but his story can spread and live forever because other people retell it in new and exciting ways that can reach new dynamic audiences.
And it kind of adapts into something that the audience can relate to. So in different environments, it might get formed within something that their values and something they can understand and relate to. And you can actually learn a lot from listening to those versions out there. Also, I could imagine pitching your company in different companies, different countries.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because how a Dane might talk about a Danish company could be very different than how an American might talk about a Danish company. Yeah. And there might be things that the Danes take for granted that the Americans find very different, and they can use and add extra emphasis upon.
Yeah, and I guess that is not something that you might consider right away when going abroad pitching at conventions or also as a founder, but I could imagine that the country culture can affect how you deliver your public speaking presentation.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
So Adam, you also told me a bit about like a certain thing you could do. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite tricks is we often think that we're not in control of our presentations and we're not in control of the audience. But a wonderful thing when you're a founder is you get to set your own rules.
Yeah.
So just because you've been asked to present for a certain amount of time and talk about a certain kind of thing doesn't mean that you always have to follow those rules, because you get to decide what you want to get out of a conference or an event. So to give you an example, I was speaking at an event in Finland, and it was a big educational event, and what they wanted me to do was to come up on stage and speak for 30 seconds on, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, and maybe 30 seconds would have been better. And they wanted me to present for 30 minutes all about the educational work that I was doing. But that's really boring for me, because I don't learn anything from that, because I'm just telling people what I did, but what I want is lots of input from everybody else. Yeah. So I love to take questions from the audience, but they said, no, we're not doing questions from the audience, but you can just mill around and get the questions in the bar afterwards. And I thought, well, this is no good. I need to guarantee that I get questions, because that's what I want. So what I do is, in my talk, I add something that's called a dropped thread, which is where you tell the audience, you give the audience a little hint as to what you really want them to do. So here's a great thing, was in my presentation, right at the start, in the first 5 minutes, I say, thank you so much for welcoming me today, and I'm going to tell you about some of the lessons that I teach. And so today I'm going to tell you the story of the second most dangerous lesson I ever taught. Does that sound good? Okay, here's the second most dangerous lesson. And then I do my 30 minutes on the second most dangerous lesson. And then if I say, if you've got any questions, come and meet me backstage. Well, everybody has the same question, and you know it. Well, if that's the second most dangerous, what's the first most dangerous? And the only way that you're going to find that out is you're going to have to come and you're going to ask. So I made it the world's easiest thing for the audience to come up and ask me, and they all think, oh, I bet he's never been asked this before. Oh, what's your first most? Oh, I'm so happy you asked. And then it leads into a more interesting conversation. Yes. And so when you're a founder, you can get to do that kind of thing. You can get to do that thing too. You can lead a little dropped thread. And the reason why it's called a dropped thread is because sometimes we call stories our little threads. But have you ever seen on your clothes, or maybe when you've seen on your friend's shirt or something, they have a little piece of thread that's just hanging, and you can't resist pulling it down. You just have to pull it. And as soon as you pull it, all their clothes go and sort of unravel the whole thing, and it leads into something new. So oftentimes you can think about what you're doing and what you really want. And I've seen this happen a lot, for example, on the British version of the Dragon's Den TV show, because what you think is happening is people are going on, they're making some rational business decisions, and they're shaking hands, and maybe they leave with the money, maybe they're not. But there was a genius guy that I coached in Britain who was going on to the British version of the show. And what he did was he realized he didn't need to do a deal with the dragons. He had enough money. He didn't need to do it at all. What he wanted was for everybody to start talking about him.
Yeah.
So he did his presentation. His presentation was brilliant.
Yes.
He lowered the value of his company so that it was a no-brainer, and all of the dragons were then fighting, oh, I will do this deal. No, I will do this deal. No, I will do this deal. And of course, he shook hands with all of them and said, okay, yes, thank you. That's wonderful. And of course, then it all goes on television as what a great success, having all of these people fighting for this company. And of course, with anything legal, afterwards, you have to sign some documents to say that you're going to give away the shares of your company. Yeah. And he said, oh no, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to give away any shares. But he waited until after the TV show had gone out. And by that point, everybody was talking about him, and then he calls up the newspapers to say, you know, I got all of these dragons excited and I turned them all down because, and that's a big story, and that ends up in the newspaper too. So it gets people talking because it's this little dropped thread of how you think it's going to go versus how it really goes. Yeah. So the next time that you're presenting, if you're going for an award, if you're going for to win a prize, if there's any kind of competition, you can think, well, what's the win for me? And it might be different from the win from the competition. Is it that you not particularly want to win the competition, but you really want to have another 5-minute conversation with one of the experts? Then just leave that into your talk. And it's very easy to drop these little threads and just say, I'm not here to talk about da, 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 da. And you give them something absolutely irresistible. And then as soon as the cameras close, or as soon as they're like, they have to know. And that's the real secret to being a superstar speaker, is to know why you're speaking and drop those threads.
Yeah, like to have like a plan for going up there and with the result that you want to kind of come out of it.
Exactly, and it may be very different from what you initially think, and it may be different from what everybody else is doing too, because for me, I often say my plan is to be so good that I get invited back. Yes. That's how I started public speaking, in that I would go to Europe and I would give the first part of a talk and then say, oh, but this is only part 1, but if you want part 2, you're going to have to invite me back. And then everybody did, and then year after, oh, this is part 3, if you want part 4, you have to come again and invite me back. And I traveled the world in that way by dropping the thread of what you want to do.
Oh wow, that
you can have a lot of fun.
That is such a good idea. What a great tip. I really love that. And you do have such a huge amount of experience with, for example, TED Talks, and so here on a final note, maybe can you share an anecdote or maybe an experience that you have had with, like, for example, working on the TED Talks? That is like the very top of getting up there, public speaking, what you can achieve. So that is like, for me, speaking like a star is like getting invited to speak at a TED Talk. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Yeah, the working behind the scenes, especially at TEDx events around the world, is so exciting. And one of the things that's interesting for me is I get to see who makes it to the stage, but also who doesn't make it to the stage. Right. And usually when we're talking about TED Talks and TEDx Talks, we're talking about things that are really interesting. Yeah. And so many people will ask me, how do I give an interesting talk? And the real truth of it is anybody can give a TED Talk or a TEDx talk. Yeah. But if you want to give an interesting talk, you have to live an interesting life. Yeah. And that's the rule, because boring people give boring talks, interesting people give interesting talks, and you would be surprised how many boring people say, my biggest problem is I'm just not interesting. And they think that there's some magic gimmick that you can do to make people interested in you. But the truth is, only interesting people do interesting things. And if you've ever been to that party where you meet that one person who's the most boring person in the world and you can't wait to get rid of them, but then at that same party you meet the most interesting person and they could be talking about anything. It's absolutely mind-blowing. That's the beauty of TED and TEDx events, is they have so much variety, because it's not like you're going to hear from one kind of person. You're going to hear from an artist and a ballerina and a metal worker and a scientist and a physics expert and so on and so on. And nobody ever goes to a conference about everything. But when it comes to TED Talks, that's what people really look for, because they're looking for interesting people. And so I always find that how you are as a person is more important than how you are on stage, because if you're a nice person, if you're reliable, if you're trustworthy, if you're honest, if you're willing to grow, then people will give you a chance on the stage. If they like you off the stage, they're going to want to have you on the stage as well. So you don't want to be an asshole, you don't want to be an idiot, you don't want to be overly arrogant or overly aggressive. Be a person who people really want to work with, because working in events is so high pressure. And everyone behind the scenes, they're working really hard to make you look good when you're on the stage. So you have to remember that just because you're stood on the stage, it doesn't mean that there's not 50 other people working in the background, from the one who sweeps the floors to the one who makes the coffee. If the floors aren't swept and the coffee isn't good, then your audience isn't going to like your presentation. So those people are just as important as you. And I think that as long as you're mindful of that, and mindful of what you're doing when you're talking, you're giving a gift rather than taking. Like, you've got to give a gift. And so you've got to imagine, if you're taking something from the audience all the time, if you're saying, give me my money, give me my attention, give me all this good stuff, then it's chant. So we can say that speaking is like giving a gift to the audience, because if you're taking their attention or trying to take their money, you're sucking things out of the room. You want to give something, give your big smile, give your big personality, give your gift of generosity, and it will come back 100 times over, for sure.
Let's close it on that one, because that was really brilliant. Give a lot, give value away, be nice.
It's an important skill and difficult.
Interesting and authentic. Yes, thank you so much, Adam. It was really like a big pleasure, and really, really relevant tips and learnings, and so interesting to hear about the anecdotes from what you have experienced yourself as well. Thank you so much.